Hi, Bree Stensrud here, and this video segment is going to be with the Director of U.S. Mobilization and Advocacy at World Relief, Matthew Soerens, and we're going to be talking about Dreamers and what is the DACA program. So Matt, if you're with us, come through. There you are. Okay. All right. So what is DACA? Who are Dreamers? Help us.
Sure. So I'll start with Dreamers. So the term Dreamers comes from a bill that was introduced in Congress back in, I believe, 2001. Bipartisan from the very beginning, with a Republican and Democratic senator. And the acronym I won't go into, but it stood for DREAM, and it was the DREAM Act. The basic idea here was you've got people who were brought to the United States as children before, in this case, I think their 16th birthday, who are not here lawfully, either because they were brought across the border unlawfully, or they were brought on a temporary visa that lapsed and they didn't go back to their country of origin. But of course, I think there's a lot of consensus among Americans that, well, we don't want to hold someone accountable, having, they've now been here maybe for 10 or 15 or 20 or 30 years, to hold them accountable for some decision that was made not on their behalf, but that they couldn't have possibly made as a small child to overstay that visa or to come into the United States unlawfully. So the idea of the DREAM Act was if people came here before their 16th birthday, if they will finish high school in the United States and either go on to, then they would be able to get temporary legal status. And then with that, they could go on to either some college or military service. And with that, would be able to earn permanent legal status in the United States, which gets you onto a path towards citizenship. That's the idea of the DREAM Act. The DREAM Act has been introduced basically every Congress for the last 20 years. And it's at one point passed the House of Representatives. At a different point, it passed the U.S. Senate. But if you know how our congressional process works, it has never passed the House and the Senate in the same Congress and then made its way to the president to be signed into law. So as we're recording this, it has never passed. And so Dreamers is kind of the term used for people who would qualify for the DREAM Act, people who are brought as children to the United States and are, because they are unlawfully present, that means you usually don't have a social security number, it means you can't work legally. It means that you're not eligible for any sort of federal financial aid, which makes it really hard to go to college in most cases. And even if you can go to college, you can't work legally. So it almost begs the question, is it worth it to go earn that degree? And ultimately, you're at risk of deportation. No administration has really prioritized Dreamers because I think they're kind of the most sympathetic category of undocumented immigrants. But there are people in that category who get deported every year, and that's always a risk sort of hanging over someone's head.
So this is an act. It's not necessarily a status that someone can have.
So
This is a policy.
The DREAM Act it's a bill. It's not a law because it's never passed. It's never passed and been signed by the president. So okay. DACA, you asked about. DACA is basically an executive workaround for the president, in this case, President Obama, back in 2012, to do at least what President Obama thinks the executive branch has the authority to do, and a lot of scholars agree with him, though not all of them, which is to say, the president cannot give someone a green card, cannot give someone lawful permanent resident status. There's laws that define who qualifies for that. But what the executive branch, the Department of Homeland Security, under the president's authority, can do is defer action on someone's case. In fact, every president going back to like the 60s has done this on some level. They've had certain categories or individual immigrants who they said, you are technically deportable, but we're going to formally say we're not going to deport you, and therefore we're going to give you work authorization. So that's not a new idea to have deferred action on a case. What was a little bit unprecedented was to defer action on a category of people who was so large. So when DACA was put into place in 2012, the estimates were that it could be up to a couple million people who might qualify. In the end, we saw about 800,000 people actually apply and be granted deferred action for childhood arrivals, which is what DACA stands for. What that means is they are temporarily have this deferral from deportation, which they can renew every few years. With that comes work authorization, which means you can work lawfully, you can get a valid social security number, you can pay your taxes. You can't get federal financial aid or other governmental benefits, like you can't get food stamps or a welfare check or something like that, but you can work and pay your own way through college. And it's been a real lifesaver for hundreds of thousands of young people, many of whom are, I have colleagues at World Relief who could not be employed lawfully by World Relief were it not for DACA. So it's been in many ways a lifesaver, but it also is a temporary program that is constantly over people's heads that maybe a new president will end DACA. And we saw that possibility in recent years. Maybe a court at some point will rule that actually we don't think President Obama was within his authority to create DACA in the first place. And we've seen those court cases moving through the courts as well. So there's a lot of uncertainty with which these DACA recipients live, because they could be told rather quickly, actually, you have to leave the United States, or if you don't, you'll be here unlawfully, and you can't work lawfully. So you'll either, you can't sustain yourself here, or you can work unlawfully, which is probably not in the same, if you went and earned a college degree. There are employers who will employ people unlawfully in this country, clearly, because there's millions of people in that situation, but they tend to be in very low-wage jobs, not the sort that you needed a bachelor's degree or a master's degree for. So there's a lot of uncertainty hanging over those folks' heads. And again, all because of a decision that was made in many cases before they could even, speak, or when they were a small child, to come to this country, again, for complicated reasons, some of which are very compelling, but it wasn't the decision on the part of that person because they were a kid.
So Matt, what are we hoping happens for this particular vulnerable population, this group of immigrants in our country?
Sure. I mean, what I hope, and I know I can speak for World Relief on this, and a lot of evangelical Christians, and frankly, the significant majority of Americans, is that Congress will step up and do what only Congress can do, what no executive branch can do, which is give people lawful permanent resident status, which is under current law. That's the first step towards ever the possibility of becoming a citizen. That's something that could be the DREAM Act, basically the same legislation that has been introduced time after time for 20 years. It's recently been reintroduced, and again, it's bipartisan. Senator Graham from South Carolina and Senator Durbin from Illinois have co-sponsored that legislation. Or maybe it's not called the DREAM Act. I'm not caught up in what it's called. People will maybe debate, well, is this just people who arrive before 16, or should we go up to people who arrive before 18? What are the disqualifiers? Of course, serious criminal offenses are going to exclude you, but who gets to define exactly where those lines are? But certainly for those who already have DACA, they've already passed those criminal background checks. They've already been working lawfully, and at this point, most of them for 5, 6, 7 years, or at least authorized to work. Some were still in school when they received this status. So I think it's really urgent for Congress to resolve that. And that means the majority of the votes in the House of Representatives, 60 votes in the U.S. Senate, and being signed by the president. So what we've been urging at World Relief is for our elected officials to come together on a bipartisan basis and finally pass something like the DREAM Act.
Because without something like that, those who are DACA recipients are having to apply every 2 years? How long? What is that cadence for them?
It's every 2 years, they need to renew their status. And there's always the possibility that a court could say, actually, you can no longer renew this status. So you need to leave. That's, as we're speaking, there's a pending case that could happen anytime. And there could be future lawsuits. It could be a future executive branch that says, we're going to just end this program, which we saw some attempts to do in the last administration. So there's a lot of risk hanging over the heads of these young people. And I say young people, most of my friends who are dreamers are in their 30s now. These are people who were brought as children, but this has been going on for so long that many of them are married, have children, they're providing for their families, and all of that could be thrown up into the air if a court or a president makes a decision that throws this program in jeopardy again.
Right. So the vast majority of these people brought here as children, they have been immersed in American culture and life, have raised their families here, and they have mixed status families, right? So they have this temporary status, they have American-born children, and so without a permanent solution, then we would be separating families again.
Yeah, or they could take their kids to a foreign country potentially, and their kids can learn a new language, which is not easy to do, and be in a country without educational opportunities that are equal to the U.S. So we're putting people into a very difficult circumstance. And again, based on a decision that they didn't make in the first place. It's holding kids responsible for a decision that was made when they were 5 years old.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. That's really helpful information, and that definitely gives us an awareness of where we need to be in playing a role in helping this segment of our population.